Yo, Sleepy Sheepy here. Today we're going to be looking at a build that's very near and dear to my heart, and this is going to be a classic strength build running the claymore. So I love the claymore. I mained it for basically the first 400 hours that I played in this game. I did all the PvE with it, and I thought it was time to bring it back out, use it again, especially in patch 1.10 when hyper armor is so powerful. So we'll be running this build at level 125, and it's just a super straightforward build. It's going to be 60 vigor, 54 strength, 20 dex, and 30 endurance, and this will get you pretty much everywhere you need to go. If you're running a vagabond starting class, you can be a little bit more optimal, maybe run a bit more endurance, but I found this to be good enough. We can still have a parry shield on hand, and we can still hit 109 poise, so both of those options are great, and we will also be able to switch over to a great bow, and I'll be swapping around a little bit. I did use Flaming Strike predominantly, but you could definitely change up the Ashes of War you put on the claymore. Something like Impaling Thrust is going to be a great option because you do get the pierce damage. Also, Piercing Fang is going to be awesome as well. So that's going to be kind of the main setup. I will be swapping around a little bit. I did enjoy the Iron Cleaver for wake-ups. Sometimes the Spike Cestus is nice for chase downs. The Arumi is also nice for chase downs, and the Great Bow is just a great option to have on hand at all times. We'll also be running the Axe Talisman as well as a Spear Talisman. I would switch around the Axe Talisman to the Shard of Alexander if I thought I was going to be going for the Ash of War a little bit more than the heavy attack, but the heavy attack is amazing, especially when fully charged. You can get so much damage off because you'll be getting counter damage a lot of the time if your opponent is mid-attack, and you will get that boosted by the innate pierce damage that comes with the poke attack, and that's boosted further by the thrust with the Spear Talisman. So these two together can result in very, very high damage, and it is extremely nice. You also have the option of poke, which comes out pretty quickly, and you can actually vortex your opponents a little bit with the poke, assuming they don't get too far away. If they roll directly back, a lot of times they'll be out of range, but you can kind of just like wave dash at them and get that poke out really quick, and it's nice because you can switch up your timing with the heavy attack. So I just love the claymore. I think it's a fantastic weapon. The hyper armor is quite strong in this patch, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend it in the same way that I used to. I think crutching on hyper armor is a thing that does happen in this newest patch, but everyone is using it, so if you want to join the club, I think the claymore is a great way to do that. That pretty much covers everything that I wanted to say about this build. It's pretty straightforward, but if you have any questions, definitely let me know in the comments below, and if you wouldn't mind considering subscribing, I'd definitely appreciate it. Anyway, let's jump into our invasions. Alright, so to start us off, we're going to have an invasion that's quite spicy in my opinion. It involves 3 players that have a lot of AoE spam, and it can be quite difficult to just kind of navigate that incoming bursts of damage as well as stay out of range, but being in these long, narrow hallways is going to be helpful. So we do see that Dragon Breath coming out first, and we immediately start to backpedal, and we want to deter the host from getting too close to us. We don't want them to have us out in the open, so we're going to zone a little bit with Flaming Strike, just discourage them from sprinting after us and being extremely aggressive. It will be problematic if they're all using their AoE at the same time in an open area, and we can't get out, which is kind of what's behind me. I can get up with a ladder behind me, but really the best I can do would be to run down this tunnel, and obviously it will be tricky to get down there at this point. So I throw some sleep pots, not really to try to get damage off while they're slept. It's mostly just to drain some of their FP, because I can, just feel how FP intensive this invasion is going to be. And while the host is buffing, I go ahead and manage to kill one of the phantoms. And so there we can see how helpful Flaming Strike is. If you get both hits, you can often put the phantom in one-shot range, and if they're in one-shot range, the chase down becomes a lot less daunting, and you can usually turn it into a 2v1 rather than a 3v1 if you're successful with that chase down. So kind of a lucky moment where we did get that last bit of damage while hitting the host, so we didn't get stunned before that kind of damage came and successfully killed the phantom, but we're in a good spot now where we can be a little bit more cautious. We know a lot of what their plan is, and we're going to continue to try and debuff them with freezing pots, get some chip damage in, just do whatever we can to continuously apply pressure and get little bits of damage here or there. So the Phantom comes up behind me, and now we're in kind of a dangerous spot where there's spells coming from in front of me and Dragon Breath from behind me. Fortunately, we're able to roll some of it, and we take a moment to continuously back off and retreat rather than try to get damage on the Phantom, because it feels prudent to just kind of dodge some of the incoming spells. And I think that was the right decision at that time, where we were able to, kind of successfully retreat, regroup, get our HP back to full, and we didn't get too greedy with the Phantom. So eventually we do get a chase down and manage to avoid some of the incoming damage from the host, and now it's just a one-on-one. So blue did get summoned in, but it's too little too late. We're able to successfully use some pierce damage on the host, and then they attack out of stun, so we're able to punish that as well. And that was just kind of a nice 3v1 where we really avoided some really dangerous stuff coming our way. Next up, we have another 3v1, and we're able to very quickly isolate this Phantom and get all the damage we need. That can be a really good option to go for a plunging attack when you know your opponent is going to be stuck in the fall animation for a short period of time. So they will land, hit the ground, and they won't be able to move for a minute. So if you can go for a plunging attack, oftentimes you'll be able to land it. Obviously, the distance has to be the right height, and you can see both the Phantom and the host try to do the exact same thing to me. Fortunately, they both missed. So that worked out for me with the Phantom, but now we're on to the host and the other Phantom. And it's definitely a scary setup. Raptor Talons are quite strong. Fortunately, one of the Phantoms switches away from it. They were running Endure with Raptor Talons, which, you really have to respect. And if you get it a little too greedy, you can get caught by a running heavy, followed up by another heavy, and oftentimes get bled. And it's not unusual to see players using that with Bloodflame Blade, which is even more problematic because that does chip bleed damage that can't be rolled. So very scary, but they do make an odd decision to switch over to a Colossal Weapon, and here we do see them switch back to the Raptor Talons. So yeah, the Colossal Weapon was definitely a weaker choice of the two, and they're going for these running attacks followed up by a heavy. They're also trying to get their Endure in. We did get a weird poise break after Endure, so I'm not sure if there's a little window in between the Ash of War where you're able to poise break, but we got kind of lucky there. A couple hits off, and then here, as they seem fairly aggressive and in kind of a tight spot, we go for our Ash of War Flaming Strike. They end up rolling in, and we're able to get the follow-up as well for a successful kill. So we've turned it into a one-on-one. Things are definitely going our way, and we can focus on the host here. And it's important to not get too greedy, not be too aggressive. We can see them going for a delayed crouch poke with the Zweihander, and that can do quite a bit of damage. So we're able to successfully roll into their Ash of War Giant Hunt and get a backstab, and then we go for an Iron Cleaver Wake Up. We're not actually able to land it, but we do switch back to a Claymore pretty quickly, get a nice jumping light attack as they come up the stairs, and then swap very quickly over to the Thrusting Sword that will do the last bit of HP. So a successful chase down in that moment as well. Now this invasion I really enjoyed. It's a 3v1, and I am just in a terrible spot. There's lots of high damaging weapons coming my way. I'm very much thinking about using the Stormhawk Axe, but Moonveil's in the mix, so it's possible I could get stunned out, although you might have enough hyper armor. But what I do is go for the lever and utilize the iframes, because I want to just get out of this area, because it's just not a good spot to be in, especially in this gank setup. So I try to just kind of give myself a little bit of space, and in the process, the host falls off and dies. I get knocked off as well, but I'm close enough to the floor where it's okay, and then we have the Phantoms just wave in appreciation and then kill themselves, landing on the button and sending the other Phantom up. So a really nice ending to what could have been an extremely difficult gank situation. Next up we have a really fun one, and this one was quite long, but it heavily relied on the traps that shoot fire out of the pillars. So we did have to be pretty careful about the different AoEs. We have Hand of Melania, we have the Bolt of Grandsax, we also have the Godslayer Greatsword, which has kind of a weird Ash of War, and I haven't faced it too often too recently, so my roll timing for it was a bit bad. I feel like it comes out just a little bit strangely in terms of the timing, and it's also faster than the other colossal swords, so you do need to be aware of that, and it's easy to just get clipped. So clearly the host had the same idea as me, where they were going to hide behind the corner and then go for Dragon Breath when I came through. Fortunately, I was able to stun them with Flaming Strike and force them to back off, so having something that can kind of go around a wall is going to be quite helpful, and that's why Flaming Strike is just such a good option for invaders. I really strongly recommend it. So again, they run down the hallway, we go for Flaming Strike, a blue's in the world now, and here we're able to hyper armor trade with our charged R2, and that's extremely helpful against Hand of Millennia, which has a fair amount of hyper armor itself, and it can really poise break you continuously, as I'm sure many of you have experienced. So being able to utilize hyper armor and also knock them out of their Ash of War animation is just hugely beneficial, and I recommend either using Endure or something like Stamp Uppercut. Things like that where you can hyper armor trade with Hand of Millennia will help you negotiate that incoming poise damage, I think, fairly well. So here I was not expecting to either get the kill or the Ash of War to be successful, but they were getting aggressive, so I wanted to punish that with Flaming Strike. Just putting out the AoE associated with the first part of Flaming Strike was enough to finish off the Phantom and put me in a much better spot with the host. So here I start using Margit's Shackle, and if you don't know, that will create an area effect that triggers basically all the pillar traps throughout the level. So that forces that column to start shooting fire, and that changes what space is available for the host and the blue to go into. So here I want to back out, so I go for Margit's Shackle again and just run down that hallway, and then here I use it again, hoping that I'd be able to hit them as they came through. The column's not quite fast enough, and at this point another blue does get summoned into the world. So again, pretty chaotic throughout this invasion and lots going on, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I also enjoyed just kind of the challenge of incorporating the environment. So obviously it doesn't matter if you get kills with the column of fire, but I feel like it's a little bit more dynamic, and it also can just kind of give you an edge or give you a breather depending on when you use it. It just kind of takes away options from other players, and I want to be a little bit more cognizant of using the environment for my invasions. I don't just want to kind of be blindly swinging and hoping that I have better mechanics. I think, changing where players exist throughout the map can be a really fun way to be successful in invasions, and I think that's something you see a lot of really good players do. So here again I go for Margit's Shackle, and I'm trying to get them down there. I know the timing a little bit better, so I want to have a little bit more space between me and the other players, and here the blue goes for a long Ash of War and allows me to get Margit's Shackle off again, and this time where there was once safety, there is now fire, and they get roasted pretty quickly. So we do have a nice moment there where we get a kill with the Pillar of Fire, and Margit's Shackle does become a useful invasion tool, which it typically isn't for my invasion, so I'm happy to incorporate it and justify having it on my soft swap bar. So at this point we were thinking about going for some reverse Bloodhound Step backstabs. The host is now backing towards that column, so I go for the Shackle again, and they're not super cognizant of what I'm doing, and they get roasted for another 720 damage. So not a full kill, and eventually they run away and another blue is in the world, so we do need to kind of tackle that. There was a bit of downtime as we kind of reset that I wanted to skip through, but we do see some attempts to go after me with Carrion Slicer, and that's a great option to use the heavy attack, and at this point the host has had enough. I've killed too many phantoms and they just go in the corner for a backstab. So a funny moment from the host there, and just kind of a dynamic invasion that I had a lot of fun in, and it was a bit on the longer side, but I think it was pretty rewarding. So next up we have another invasion in one of these catacomb dungeons, and it's going to be another 3v1. Very quickly we're able to get a ton of damage off on this Phantom, and we can see how useful it is to get that roll catch with a heavy attack. It's create pierce damage if they're going to be going for an attack in that moment, and now we can start aggressing on the host and the Phantom. The Phantom did not have enough stamina to withstand a jumping attack with their one-eyed shield, so we're able to grab their riposte real quick and turn it into a one-on-one. Here I go for the poise break against Eleanor's pole blade, and it's somewhat successful. It's obviously a better trade, but I don't ultimately feel like the claymore is the right tool for the job. So eventually I'll be switching over to the star fist, and I feel like that is going to be much more helpful, especially because I have endure on the star fist. So that's going to be very useful in the very, very fast poise break that comes with getting hit by a Bloodblade or getting hit by the Blood Loss proc. And fortunately, Endure can poise through both of those, so it allows you to continuously pressure and not just get hit by Reduvia spam every single time you try to approach. So here we can see that being pretty helpful. I'm very close to getting bled, but my opponent is very low on HP and they start rolling away. And now we're really actually able to continuously pressure them. So as they, go to heal, we're able to get a nice heavy attack, and that's going to do quite a bit of damage. They don't have a ton of HP, even though they're rune arced, so really it's just a matter of chasing down an opponent that is hard to approach unless you have something like Endure. And I'm starting to appreciate that, I think, a little bit more as I play this game, where some things are just very, very dangerous to approach unless you can guarantee that you're not going to get poise broken, especially in this patch where, poise breaking is much more common. So we do have a next invasion, and as one phantom starts going for a whole bunch of buffs, I get a little bit worried and do manage to take out this phantom that was only running like 1k HP, so kind of an odd choice there, but we are able to avoid the incoming damage that comes from the other phantom, and now it's a 2-on-1. So I'm a little bit wary of the different types of projectiles that might come from this phantom that did quite a bunch of buffing ahead of time. They went for Howl of Shibriri, which means that they're probably going to try to play a little bit passively because it increases the amount of damage you take, but it also increases the amount of damage that you deal. So it's definitely a good option to be more passive when you have a buff like that on you. But fortunately, I'm able to get in and shoot a flaming strike their direction before they can get off their Ash of War, and now it's just a 1-on-1, and this host is using a power stance curve sword setup, so I'm able to think about parrying them. I'm not entirely sure if I want to, but a hunter is coming into the world, and I pull out a shield that will allow me to do that. So we're just kind of waiting. They're doing a good job of zoning the kind of pair of, using Freezing Mist and then going for Hoarfrost Stomp is a great option. It obstructs my view and probably means that I'll get hit by a lot of frost damage all at once. But fortunately, we are able to land the parry, and then we go for a Wake Up with the Iron Cleaver. We don't actually manage to land it in the first hit, but we go for another fully charged attack that has quite a bit of forward momentum, and we're able to land that final hit for the kill. So moving on, we have kind of an interesting invasion here. This host is playing very passively, and I don't see any help, so that kind of sets alarms off in my head, like, I feel like this might be a bit of a trap. And that little statue on the right back there looked a little suspicious, so I was anticipating some sort of, trap, and were able to kill the phantom that was coming in hot and heavy with the power stance Anspur rapiers with poison and rot and bleed, and it was just quite a mess. So being able to take care of that phantom and kind of being prepared ahead of time, thinking there might be a trap coming my way, I think was a very helpful mentality going into that. And we are able to get a nice backstab. We go for a follow-up with the Iron Cleaver again. We get poise broken with their Colossal Sword, so we need to back off. And at this point, blue has come into the world, and this was definitely my favorite blue that I've seen in a little while. They basically just wiggled their weapon and stood over in the corner and were not aggressive, and I feel like they just kind of wanted to see what would happen. So it always amuses me when blues are really not on the host side and are just kind of a nuisance. And here we're able to get a nice jumping attack followed up by a light attack. They're rolling kind of crazily, and we're able to just endure through their Ash of War, which would normally be a guaranteed poise break, and kill the host before the phantom comes in. And next up we have another nice invasion in some catacombs, and we have players that are mostly going for the PvE. I'm trying to use that time to buff because I didn't use that with my initial spawn in iframes, and here this phantom is using iframes to avoid the damage coming their way from my claymore. So an unfortunate moment there, and it means we did get hit by the other phantom. So again, I just want to regroup a little bit, get my HP back to full, knowing that there's some high damaging weapons in the mix like Blasphemous Blade, and here the phantom starts going for some madness incantations. We're able to successfully avoid too many poise breaks in the process and begin the chase down on the Phantom. And we go for a soft swap over to the Misericord, which allows us to get the last bit of HP that we need to successfully take care of that Phantom. So being able to soft swap to a Misericord, I think, is a really important thing to have in your back pocket, because it's going to be a little bit faster than the Claymore, and if they go for that heal, sometimes just that little bit of extra speed, a couple milliseconds, can be the difference maker. So in that moment it was, and that turned it into essentially a one-on-one with that Phantom that succumbs to a heavy attack. And at this point we have a host that has very low HP, and they're just kind of standing in the corner. They do decide to heal up, which I think was the right move, and here I go for a free-aimed fan dagger, do manage to get the headshot, and then follow it up with a couple attacks that bring us the win. So now it's time for the duel portion of the showcase, and this first duel is against definitely a bit of an off-meta setup, kind of a fun one though. We have a great axe in the main hand and then a dagger in the offhand, so I don't see this too often, but we know that we can kind of utilize the heavy attack with Claymore to really trade successfully into these really high damaging attacks, and then we know that they're going for these very long repeated attacks, so we're able to just kind of time our giant hunt attack into their like successive attacks that can't really be broken out of. So understanding that is a good approach for a duel like that, and we're able to move on to our next one. So this player is using a colossal sword, and we do need to be careful here. The amount of damage you can receive is quite high from this weapon, so just a couple hits can be very problematic. And here we do get frostbitten, but we don't actually take any damage because we rolled it, so a nice moment there where we're able to just kind of avoid a lot of damage. So here I'm starting to fish a little bit, and I'm able to actually poise break my opponent. They go for freezing mist here again, and I'm able to roll into it. I still get frostbitten, but I am able to strafe around them and get the backstab, and here we do have the right timing with our iron cleaver, and the fully charged heavy allows us to get the successful follow-up. So a nice successful duel there. I was very happy about the backstab followed up by the iron cleaver, and to kind of combat the crazy hyper armor that comes with colossal swords, I'm trying to get better at backstabbing them, because they are very susceptible to backstabs if you have the tight timing required. So next up we have a player running another greatsword, which I'm always happy to see. I'm a huge fan of the Knight's greatsword, but I am also enjoying the Claymore very much. I kind of took a break from the Claymore and exclusively used the Knight's greatsword, so it was fun to kind of see how the Claymore would stack up against it. I'm also very familiar with the Knight's Greatsword playstyle, and one thing that's nice about the Claymore is if your opponent whiffs a jumping attack, you can oftentimes assume they're going to go for a follow-up because of the true combo option, and if you're able to space that jumping attack successfully, you can oftentimes get counter damage with the Claymore and just be a little bit out of range. So I think that's a good approach against the Knight's Greatsword, just because that follow-up attack after a jumping attack is so common. Next up we have a player that's using kind of a fun build, Great Club as well as a offhand dagger, and they're doing a pretty solid job of trading, even with all the extra pierce damage that we have from the heavy attacks, but we do manage to hit them out of the air and then catch their roll with just a crouching attack. So nice moment again there against a pretty fun off-meta setup that you definitely like to see. Moving on, we have a player with a colossal sword. Again, we're going to need to be very wary of the hyper armor here, because if we hit a little bit too late, we'll be taking a lot of damage. They are running it on a bleed setup, so we're able to go for a neutral jump and just hop over their light attack and get a couple of quick attacks in here. Not sure what happened to my roll, but I was trying to roll into that. Fortunately, we're able to roll into their attempt with Giant Hunt and grab the backstab. So Giant Hunt has showed up a lot more these days, I feel like, and it is very easy to roll it, so I definitely recommend that. Next up, we have a player that has beaten me a ton of times, but this was one of my successful duels against them, so I was very happy to show it. Here we're also using some lightning drawstring grease, which is a great option if you're not going to be running Flaming Strike as a buff. so gives you a little bit more AR. And here we can see just the great movement of my opponent. They pull out a sword and board and are, making my life a little bit harder because I'm, nervous that they're going to parry me. So I start trying to either go for strangely timed attacks or jumping attacks. And here I go for one jumping attack and then anticipate they're going to try to parry the second one, so I go for a second jump attack. And I definitely recommend that if you are anticipating parries, going for jumping attacks, even if you just go for neutral jumps after you immediately jumped, it can be a nice way to avoid the parry and get that successful damage you need to win the duel. So next up we have another player. This time they're running a curved sword, and this is kind of a scary weapon these days. I feel like the range and vortex potential that comes with curved swords, or curved greatswords that is quite scary, and running a greatsword against it feels I don't know if I would say it feels bad, but you do need to be careful. They also have a shield that they are periodically pulling out, so I'm worried about parrying again. I feel like I've been seeing a lot more parries these days, but perhaps it's just me. Here I go for a charged attack. I was hoping to catch their roll because it's very easy to do that if you have players that are not used to the timing of the claymore, but this player is patient and delayed their roll very well, and I'm actually able to go for a ravioli step into sword dance, and that extra bit of hyper armor allows me to get the last bit of HP that I need for a successful duel. Moving on, we have a player that's using power stanced sword spears, and I'm actually a huge fan of this setup. I recommend going for mostly light attacks and not so much using the L2, except for the occasional jump attack. I feel like that's a good way to incorporate a surprise. And then you can also use the jumping heavy to grab the true combo that's associated with the light attack afterwards. So just a very fun build and a very fun setup that I do like to play myself, but we do get a nice successful duel against that player. So moving on, we have a player that's running the power stance great spears, always a classic, and we do need to be worried about these. These can do a ton of damage, and I really recommend, if you feel like you're starting to get vortexed, don't continuously roll in so you can just kind of successfully judge the timing of the next attack. Try to get out as fast as possible, try to reset to neutral as fast as possible, because once you're sucked into the vortex with the power stance great spears, it is very difficult to get out. So here you can see me trying to do that, trying to roll out when I think there might be incoming damage and not be too aggressive. This player, fortunately, is not maintaining their advantage sometimes, where they could just kind of go instantly for a crouch and wait, and that allows me to be a little bit more aggressive than I could be with power stance lance players in some respects. So we're doing a decent job of kind of keeping each other at similar amounts of HP, and again, I don't really want to be too aggressive. There I had an unfortunate moment where my attack just missed, even though I hyper armored through their attack. They go for a jumping attack, which is, those are the ones you really need to look out for. They can do so much damage, especially if you're in the middle of an attack yourself, because if they're running the claw talisman mixed with the spear talisman, they're going to get counter damage on a buffed jump attack. So very scary there, and we are going to swap our talismans over to the feathers just to be sure that if we get low on HP, we'll have a little bit more defense, but we're able to successfully grab that kill with sword dance. Again, it's just a nice kind of surprise to pull out at the very end. Lastly, we have an invasion that was certainly an invasion of all time. They immediately go for Dragon Breath. We're able to hop up and catch them out of the air, then follow it up with Sword Dance, and they start backing off. I'm always a little bit nervous when a player has just seals in their hands, and they go for Greyrail's Roar, and we're able to actually knock them out of that before they're successful with it, which, judging by the number of frames it has available to it to start up, you really have to get lucky there. So a nice successful win there. And that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to talk about for the Claymore. I hope you enjoyed this showcase. It's really just a very solid weapon, and if you made it this far and wouldn't mind considering subscribing, I'd appreciate it, and I hope you have a good day.